They saw an older black man in a simple jacket and assumed he was nobody. They thought they could bully him, threaten him, and drag him off the plane to make room for a wealthy donor's son. They were wrong. Dead wrong. When Flight 402 ejected Master Sergeant Elias Booker over a seat dispute, they didn't just kick off a passenger. They declared war on a man with a direct line to the highest levels of the Pentagon. What happened next wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a total systematic dismantling of an airline that thought it was above the law. This is the story of the mistake that grounded an entire fleet. You are not going to believe who made the call. The rain was hammering against the reinforced glass of Terminal C at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, creating a grey, rhythmic blur that matched the dull ache in Elias Booker's left knee. It was a specific kind of pain, the kind that served as a barometer for humidity, a lingering souvenir from a chaotic extraction in Kandahar 15 years ago. Elias adjusted the collar of his charcoal-grey jacket. It was clean-pressed but undeniably dated a style that whispered church on Sunday, rather than corporate boardroom. He sat near the gate, his posture perfect, a habit drilled into his spine by 30 years of service in the United States Army, specifically the 75th Ranger Regiment. He held a boarding pass in his calloused hand, his thumb tracing the bold letters, First Class. He rarely flew first class. In fact, Elias rarely flew at all these days. He preferred the solitude of his porch in East Texas, fishing in the creek, and keeping his memories to himself. But today was different. He had been summoned to Washington, D.C. for a private memorial service at Arlington, followed by a meeting he couldn't discuss over the phone. The ticket had been arranged by his old commanding officer, General Arthur Caldwell, who insisted Elias travel in comfort. "Treat your legs, Sergeant Major," Caldwell had barked over the phone. "Don't argue with me. You're taking the big seat." The gate agent, a harried woman named Brenda, who looked like she'd been working for 12 hours straight, picked up the microphone. "Now inviting our first-class passengers and active military to board Flight 882 to Reagan National." Elias stood up. He moved slowly, favoring his left side, grabbing his small, worn duffel bag. He wasn't the first in line. Ahead of him was a throng of suits, men and women, tapping furiously on phones, talking about mergers and quarterly projections. Elias waited his turn, his eyes scanning the area. Another habit he couldn't break. Situational awareness. When he reached the scanner, the machine beeped a pleasant green. Brenda smiled at him, a genuine, tired smile. "Have a great flight, sir. Thank you for flying with Vista Airways." "Thank you, ma'am," Elias said, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. He walked down the jet bridge, the cool air of the tunnel hitting his face. He found seat 2A. It was a wide leather recliner by the window. He stowed his bag in the overhead bin and sat down, sighing as he extended his bad leg. The relief was instant. He closed his eyes, hoping to sleep through the 3-hour flight. The cabin began to fill. The air smelled of recycled coffee and expensive perfume. Elias kept his eyes closed, listening to the shuffle of luggage and the murmur of conversations. "I don't care what the app says, fix it." The voice was loud, nasal, and dripping with entitlement. Elias opened one eye. Standing in the aisle, blocking the flow of passengers, was a young man who looked to be in his late 20s. He was wearing a navy blue designer suit that cost more than Elias's first car, and he was berating a female flight attendant. "Mr. Preston," the flight attendant, whose name tag read Sarah, said softly. "Please, if you could just take your assigned seat. For now we can—" "I don't sit in row 4, the man Preston snapped. He ran a hand through his gelled blonde hair. Do you know who my father is? He's on the board of the investors group that owns your fuel contracts. I specifically requested a window seat in the front 2 rows. I need to work and I need privacy. Sir, the flight is fully booked, Sarah said, her face flushing pink. All the window seats in first class are taken. Preston's eyes darted around the cabin. They landed on Elias. Elias saw the look. It was a look he had seen 1,000 times before. It was a look of assessment followed immediately by dismissal. Preston saw the grey hair, the slightly frayed collar of the jacket, the skin color and the worn hands. He didn't see a retired sergeant major. He saw an obstacle, and a weak one at that. Preston leaned in toward Sarah, lowering his voice, but not enough to hide the sneer. What about him 2A? He's obviously an upgrade. Probably used miles or got a lucky bump from economy. Move him. Sarah looked horrified. Sir, I can't do that. That passenger has a paid ticket. Look at him. Preston scoffed, gesturing vaguely at Elias with a manicured hand. He's asleep. He doesn't need the workspace. I have a merger to close before we land in DC. If I don't get that seat, I'm calling the CEO of Vista Airways, personally. And I'll mention your name, Sarah. Elias wasn't asleep. He was watching the reflection in the window. He kept his breathing steady, his hands resting lightly on his knees. He hoped Sarah would hold the line. He hoped he wouldn't have to say a word. But then the heavy curtain separating the galley from the cabin swished open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, with a perfectly trimmed beard and a pristine uniform that identified him as the head purser. His name tag read Gavin. Is there a problem here, Mr. Preston? Gavin asked, his voice smooth and oily. He ignored Sarah and directed a beaming, obsequious smile at the angry man in the suit. Gavin, finally, Preston said, exhaling as if he'd been rescued from a deserted island. This girl is refusing to accommodate me. I need seat 2A, now. Gavin's eyes flicked to Elias, then back to Preston. The calculation was visible on his face. On one side, a young, wealthy power player who likely flew this route weekly. On the other, an old man who looked like he barely scraped together the fare. Let me see what I can do, Gavin said, stepping past Sarah and looming over Elias. Elias opened his eyes fully, turning his head slowly to look up at the flight attendant. Sir, Gavin said, his tone dropping the customer service warmth and adopting a clipped authoritative edge. I'm afraid there has been a duplicate booking error with your seat. I'm going to need you to grab your things and move back to row 12. We have an aisle seat available for you there. The lie was so blatant, so lazy that Elias almost laughed. Almost. My ticket says 2A, Elias said calmly. I checked in 2 hours ago. No error then. Well, the system just updated, Gavin lied smoothly. Mr. Preston here has the priority booking for this seat. It's a technical glitch, but we have to honor the priority status. Row 12 is still economy plus. It's very comfortable. I have a medical condition, Elias said, tapping his left knee. I paid for this seat for the legroom. I'm not moving. The cabin had gone quiet. The other passengers in first class, a mix of business people and wealthy travelers, were pretending to look at their phones, but their ears were pricked. Gavin's smile vanished. He leaned in closer, invading Elias's personal space. Sir, I am asking you nicely. Do not make this a scene. If you don't cooperate, we will classify this as a disturbance. You don't want to be removed from the flight entirely. Do you? Elias looked deep into Gavin's eyes. He saw vanity. He saw arrogance. He saw a man who enjoyed wielding a tiny amount of power because he had none in the real world. "I'm not causing a disturbance," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice that used to command platoons in the dead of night. "I am sitting in the seat I paid for. If this gentleman wants a window seat, he should have booked one earlier." Preston groaned loudly. "Oh, for God's sake, just get him out of there, Gavin. This is ridiculous." Gavin straightened up his face, reddening. He snapped his fingers at Sarah. "Go tell Captain Miller we have a non-compliant passenger in 2A. Tell him we need security at the gate." Elias didn't move. He didn't blink. He just waited. The war had started. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from awkward tension to suffocating dread. The word security hung in the air like smoke. Sarah, the young flight attendant, hesitated. She looked at Elias with apologetic eyes. "Gavin," she whispered, pulling him slightly by the sleeve. "We can't do this. I checked the manifest. Mr. Booker is a full-fare passenger. He's not an upgrade. And the system isn't showing any duplicate—" "Quiet," Gavin hissed, cutting her off. He wasn't looking at her. He was performing for Preston. "I am the lead flight attendant on this aircraft. I decide who is a safety risk. This man is refusing crew instructions. That is a federal offense. Go get the captain." Sarah bit her lip, looked once more at Elias, and retreated into the cockpit. Meanwhile, Preston Walsh was pacing the aisle, tapping furiously on his phone. "Unbelievable," he muttered loud enough for the back rows to hear. "I pay $5,000 for a ticket, and I have to deal with squatters." A woman in seat 2B, right next to Elias, finally spoke up. She was an elegant woman in her 60s with silver glasses. "Excuse me," she said, looking at Gavin. "This gentleman hasn't done anything wrong. He's been perfectly polite. The only one raising their voice is him." She pointed a manicured finger at Preston. "Thank you for your input, ma'am," Gavin said dismissively. "But please do not interfere with flight crew operations. It's for your own safety." "Safety," Elias spoke up again. He unbuckled his seatbelt, not to stand, but to shift his position. The pain in his knee was flaring up from the stress. "Son, the only safety risk here is your ego." Gavin's eyes bulged. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Elias said. "You're trying to impress a VIP by bullying an old man. It's cowardly, and it's illegal to deny me boarding or seat assignment without just cause." "I determine the cause," Gavin shouted, losing his composure. Suddenly the cockpit door opened. The pilot emerged. Captain Richard Miller was a large man, broad-shouldered with graying temples. He looked like the archetype of an airline pilot, authoritative, stern, and currently annoyed. He adjusted his hat and looked down at the scene. "What is going on back here?" Miller demanded. "We are losing our slot. ATC is giving us 10 minutes to push back." "Captain," Gavin said, stepping forward quickly to control the narrative. "The passenger in 2A is being belligerent. He refused a direct order to change seats to accommodate a operational necessity, and now he's insulting the crew. I don't feel safe with him in the cabin." Captain Miller looked at Preston, then at Elias. He saw Preston's expensive suit and recognized the name. The Walsh family was indeed a major corporate account. Then he looked at Elias. Miller sighed. He didn't want paperwork. He didn't want delays. He just wanted the problem gone. "Sir," Miller said to Elias, "I'm the captain of this aircraft. My crew tells me you're causing trouble." "I'm sitting in my seat, Captain," Elias replied, holding up his boarding pass. "Your steward is trying to force me into coach to give my seat to this man." "It doesn't matter why," Miller snapped. "If the crew asks you to move, you move. The contract of carriage states we can reassign seats at any time. Now, are you going to move to row 12, or do I have to call the airport police to drag you off?" Elias looked at the captain. He saw the fatigue in the man's eyes, but also the indifference. Miller didn't care about right or wrong. He cared about the schedule. "I am a disabled veteran," Elias said clearly. "I cannot sit in economy. My leg locks up. This isn't a preference, it's a medical necessity." "Then you should have flown a medical charter," Preston interjected, laughing derisively. "This is a business flight." "That's it," Captain Miller said. He grabbed the interphone on the wall. "Tower, this is Vista 882. We have a disruptive passenger, requesting law enforcement at gate C14, immediately." The cabin erupted in whispers. Phone cameras went up. The passengers in rows 3 and 4 were now recording everything. "You're making a mistake, Captain," Elias said. He didn't shout. His voice was eerily calm. It was the voice of a man who had called in airstrikes on coordinates while under fire. "A very big mistake." "The only mistake," Gavin sneered, leaning down, "was you thinking you belonged in first class." 2 minutes later, 3 officers from the DFW Airport Police boarded the plane. They were big men, geared up, looking ready for a brawl. "Who's the problem?" the lead officer asked. "Him." Gavin pointed a shaking finger at Elias. "He threatened me." "That is a lie," the woman in 2B shouted. "He never threatened anyone." "Ma'am, sit down or you're coming off too," Captain Miller warned. The officers approached Elias. "Sir, you need to grab your bag and come with us. Now." Elias looked at the officers. He knew the drill. If he resisted, they would hurt him. If he fought back, he would go to jail and his meeting in DC would be missed. He had to play the long game. Slowly, painfully, Elias stood up. He reached into the overhead bin and pulled down his duffel bag. He looked at Preston, who was already settling into seat 2A, with a smug grin opening his laptop. "Enjoy the seat," Elias said softly. "I hope it's worth it." He looked at Gavin, whose chest was puffed out in victory. "And you. You remember this moment." "Get off my plane," Gavin spat. Elias walked down the aisle, flanked by the police officers. He didn't look back. He could feel the eyes of every passenger on him, some pitying, some judging. He walked up the jet bridge, the humiliation burning in his chest like a hot coal. They escorted him to the gate counter. "We're going to need to see some ID and take a statement," the officer said. "The airline is pressing charges for disturbance of peace." Elias handed over his driver's license. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. "I need to make a phone call," Elias said. "You can make a call after we process you," the officer said. Elias stopped. He turned to the officer, and for the first time he let the steel show. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a small metallic card. It wasn't a credit card. It was black with a gold emblem of an eagle holding arrows and an olive branch and a direct phone number embossed in silver. On the back it simply said, "Priority Level 1, DOD." "Officer," Elias said, "you seem like a good man doing a job based on bad information. I strongly suggest you let me make this call, because if you book me, the federal marshals who come to get me out won't be as polite as I am." The officer looked at the card. He hesitated. He had served in the Marines. He recognized the Department of Defense seal, but he'd never seen a card like this. It radiated authority. "Make it quick," the officer muttered, stepping back. Elias dialed the number. It rang once. "Secure line, identify," a voice answered. Crisp. Efficient. "This is Sergeant Major Elias Booker. Service number 994 Alpha Charlie. Authorization code Jericho." There was a pause. Then the tone of the voice on the other end changed completely. It went from robotic to alert. "Sergeant Major, we have you confirmed for a briefing with the Secretary at 1400 hours. Are you inbound? No, Elias said, watching through the window as Flight 882 began to push back from the gate. I've just been ejected from Vista Airways Flight 882. The crew claimed I was a security threat. They offloaded me to give my seat to a donor's kid. Say again. The voice was icy. You are carrying sensitive briefing materials for the Joint Chiefs Sergeant Major. Did they compromise your luggage? I have my carry-on, but I am grounded in Dallas, and the airline is threatening to arrest me. There was a silence on the line, the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Stay exactly where you are, Elias. Do not let them book you. Hand the phone to the police officer. Elias held the phone out to the airport cop. It's for you. It's the Pentagon. The cop's eyes widened. He took the phone. This is Officer Reynolds. He listened for 5 seconds. His face drained of color. He stood up, straighter. Yes, sir. No, sir, I didn't know. Yes, sir. I understand. Immediate protective custody. Yes, sir. And the plane. You want us to... Reynolds looked out the window at the plane taxiing toward the runway. He swallowed hard. Yes, General. I'll radio the tower immediately. Reynolds handed the phone back to Elias with a trembling hand. He looked at his partners. Let him go, Reynolds ordered. And get the supervisor. We have to stop that plane. Stop the plane, his partner asked. It's already taxiing. I don't care if it's in the air, Reynolds said, wiping sweat from his forehead. The Department of Defense just designated Flight 882 a matter of national security. They are grounding the bird. Inside the cockpit of Vista Airways, Flight 882, Captain Richard Miller was running through his pre-flight checklist. The engines were humming a low, steady thrum, and the aircraft was third in line for the runway. He was annoyed by the delay caused at the gate, but satisfied that he had resolved the situation. In his mind, he had prioritized the comfort of a high-value client over a difficult passenger. It was simple airline math. Vista 882 Tower. The radio crackled. The voice of the air traffic controller was usually bored and rhythmic. Today it was urgent, sharp. Hold position immediately. Do not, I repeat, do not proceed to the runway. Miller frowned, keying the mic. Tower Vista 882. We are fully configured and ready. What's the hold? We're burning fuel here. Vista 882 cancel takeoff clearance. You are ordered to return to gate C14 immediately. Expedite. Miller looked at his first officer, a younger man named David, who looked equally confused. Tower, what is the reason for the return? Is it mechanical? We show all green on the board. There was a pause on the radio. When the controller came back, his voice was different, strained, as if someone was standing right behind him. Vista 882, this is a Level 1 National Security Directive. We have been informed that your aircraft is part of an active federal incident. You are to turn around now. Airport operations has cleared the taxiway for you. Law enforcement is meeting the aircraft. Miller felt a cold drop of sweat slide down his spine. National security? Did we miss a bag scan? Is there a threat on board? The threat is the aircraft itself, Captain. Return to gate. Now. The line went dead. Miller stared at the radio. He had been flying for 20 years. He had seen bird strikes, medical emergencies, and unruly drunks. He had never heard a controller sound scared. David, Miller said, his voice tight. Call the cabin. Tell Gavin to prep for arrival. Don't tell him why. Just say it's operational. Back in the first-class cabin, the mood was celebratory. Preston Walsh was reclining in seat 2A, sipping a glass of pre-flight champagne that Gavin had illegally served him before takeoff. Much better, Preston said, stretching his legs into the space Elias had vacated. You know, Gavin, I'm going to send a letter to corporate about you. Your management material. You know how to prioritize the right people. Gavin preened, adjusting his tie. I appreciate that, Mr. Preston. Vista Airways values loyalty. We can't have visual disruptions in our premium cabin. Exactly, Preston laughed. It looked like he just walked off a construction site, and the limp please, probably faking it for sympathy. The intercom chimed. Ding. Flight attendants prepare for immediate gate return. Captain Miller's voice boomed. The smile froze on Gavin's face. Preston sat up, spilling a drop of champagne on his pants. What? Preston snapped. We're going back. I have a meeting at 4. Gavin quickly put on his professional mask. I'm sure it's just a minor technical issue, sir. A warning light or something. We'll probably just reset the computer at the gate and be off in 10 minutes. But as the plane made a sharp U-turn on the tarmac, the passengers sensed something was wrong. Planes didn't move this fast on the ground unless there was an emergency. Sarah, the flight attendant who had tried to help Elias, was strapping herself into the jump seat in the galley. She looked out the small porthole window as they approached the terminal. Her eyes widened. Gavin, she said, her voice trembling. What is it now, Sarah? Gavin snapped aggressively, shoving a cart into its bay. Look outside. Gavin leaned over and looked out the window. Gate C-14 wasn't just waiting for them. It was a fortress. Parking the plane, Gavin saw flashing lights, blue, red, and white. There weren't just 2 airport police cruisers. There were black SUVs with tinted windows. There were men in tactical gear standing by the jet bridge. And standing right in the center of the chaos, perfectly calm, was the man in the charcoal gray jacket. Elias Booker. He wasn't in handcuffs. He was standing next to a man in a dark suit who was holding a phone to his ear. The airport police, the ones who had dragged Elias off, were standing at attention, looking terrified. What is going on? Gavin whispered. The plane came to a halt. The seatbelt sign turned off. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Miller's voice came over the PA, sounding shaky. Please remain seated. We have been met by authorities. No one is to stand up. Preston huffed, pulling out his phone. This is ridiculous. I'm tweeting this. #Vista Airways fail. The cabin door didn't just open. It was thrown open. 3 men boarded the aircraft. They didn't look like airport cops. They wore suits that cost as much as Preston's, but they fit differently, tailored to hide holsters. The man in the lead was older with a crew cut and eyes like flint. He held up a badge that didn't say police. It said DHS, Homeland Security Investigations. Stay in your seats, the lead agent barked. His voice filled the cabin without a microphone. Gavin stepped forward, his instinct to control the cabin kicking in. Sir, you can't just barge on here. I need to see a warrant, or... The agent didn't even slow down. He stepped into Gavin's space, forcing the purser back against the bulkhead. Sit down and shut up. You are detained. Detained? Gavin squeaked. For what? The agent ignored him and scanned the cabin. His eyes locked on seat 2A. You, the agent pointed at Preston. Get up. Preston laughed nervously, looking around for support. Me, look, officer. I think there's a misunderstanding. I'm the victim here. We had a disturbance earlier with a crazy old guy, but we kicked him off. I'm Preston Walsh. My father is... I don't care who your father is, the agent said, walking down the aisle. You are sitting in a seat that is designated as part of a secure military courier operation. You have interfered with a federal agent in the performance of his duties. Get up." Preston's face went pale. Military courier. The old guy. He was a nobody. "That nobody," the agent said, leaning down until he was inches from Preston's face, "is a retired sergeant major of the 75th Rangers, currently acting as a direct liaison to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And you just stole his seat." The agent grabbed Preston by the lapel of his expensive suit and hauled him up. "Move!" Preston scrambled into the aisle, his arrogance evaporating instantly. "I didn't know the flight attendant said it was okay, Gavin. Tell him—" The agent turned to Gavin. You're the one who authorized the removal." Gavin was trembling. It was a double booking. A glitch. I was just following customer service protocol." "You filed a false police report claiming a federal courier was a security threat," the agent said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Do you know the penalty for filing a false report to the FAA and obstructing a DoD transport?" Gavin's knees buckled. "Turn around," the agent ordered. In front of the entire first-class cabin, in front of the passengers, he had tried so hard to impress Gavin, was spun around and handcuffed. The metal clicked shut with a sound of finality. "Captain Miller!" the agent shouted toward the cockpit. Miller stepped out, looking ashen. "This aircraft is impounded as a crime scene," the agent stated. "You are grounded, Captain. The FAA is already pulling your license for review, pending an investigation into why you allowed a paying passenger to be ejected without cause. Grab your bag. You're coming with us, too." The walk of shame was usually reserved for unruly passengers, drunkards, or people caught smoking in the lavatory. Today, it was the crew of Flight 882. First, Preston Walsh was marched off the plane. He wasn't in cuffs yet, but he was being escorted by a federal agent who held his arm in a grip of iron. Preston was hyperventilating, rambling about lawsuits and calling his lawyer, but his voice was thin and reedy. Next came Gavin. The once proud head purser was weeping. Snot ran down his nose, ruining his pristine look. He kept looking at the passengers in economy as he was led past them, pleading with his eyes for someone to say he was a good flight attendant. No one did. They just stared in shocked silence. Finally, Captain Miller walked off carrying his flight bag. His head hung low. He knew his career was likely over. The pilots' union would fight for him, but the stigma of ejecting a military hero for a donor's son, that stuck. As they emerged from the jet bridge into the terminal, the scene was surreal. The gate area had been cordoned off with yellow tape. Regular passengers were pushed back against the far walls, phones out recording everything. In the center of the cleared circle sat Elias Booker. He was sitting in one of the waiting area chairs, one leg stretched out. He was holding a cup of coffee that someone had brought him. Standing next to him was a 2-star general in army fatigues who had apparently arrived from a nearby base or happened to be in the airport. The federal agents marched Preston, Gavin, and Miller into the circle and made them stop in front of Elias. The general looked at the 3 men with pure disgust. "Is this them, Sergeant Major?" Elias took a slow sip of his coffee. He looked at Preston, who was shaking. He looked at Gavin, who was looking at the floor. He looked at Miller, who refused to make eye contact. "That's them, General," Elias said calmly. Preston broke. Sir, I am so sorry," he shouted at Elias. "I didn't know I'll pay for your ticket. I'll buy you a private jet. Just tell them to let me go." Elias set his coffee down. He stood up, wincing slightly as his knee took his weight. He walked over to Preston. You think this is about money? Elias asked softly. You think you can buy your way out of decency? I just wanted a window seat, Preston stammered. And to get it, you treated a human being like garbage, Elias said. You judged me by my coat and my skin. You assumed I had no value. Elias turned to Gavin. And you. You're supposed to ensure the safety and comfort of passengers. Instead, you acted like a bouncer for a nightclub. You lied to the police. You told them I threatened you. I was scared, Gavin sobbed. I thought. You weren't scared. Elias cut him off. You were power-tripping, and you used the police as your personal weapon. The general stepped forward. Gentlemen, Sergeant Major Booker was carrying time-sensitive encryption keys for a briefing at the Pentagon. By removing him from that flight, you didn't just inconvenience a veteran. You compromised a secure chain of custody. Under the Patriot Act and current defense protocols, that makes you a threat to national security. Miller's jaw dropped. General, surely that's an exaggeration. It was a seating dispute. Not anymore, the general said. Agent, take them into custody. We'll sort out the charges at the Federal Detention Center. Wait, Preston screamed as the agents began to drag them away. My father is terrified of bad press. He'll destroy this airline. He won't have to, the general said dryly. The Department of Defense is reviewing its contract with Vista Airways as we speak. That's a $3 billion contract. Gone. As the trio was led away in handcuffs, the terminal erupted. Not in panic, but in applause. The passengers who had been watching the ones who had seen the arrogant display earlier began to clap. Elias watched them go. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just looked tired. Sergeant Major, the general said, his tone softening. I have a Gulfstream waiting on the tarmac at the private aviation terminal. We can get you to D.C. in 2 hours. You'll make the briefing. Thank you, General, Elias said. But what about my bag? It's still on that plane. The plane isn't going anywhere, Elias. My boys are retrieving your bag now. And just so you know, the general gestured to the stunned Vista Airways gate agent, Brenda. We need to rebook the other passengers, the general said to Brenda. But Flight 882 is cancelled. The aircraft is being seized for evidence gathering. Brenda nodded, eyes wide. Yes, General. Of course. Elias picked up his jacket. General, there was one person on that plane who tried to do the right thing. A flight attendant named Sarah. The general nodded. We'll make a note of it. She won't suffer for this. In fact, if Vista goes under, we might have a civilian role for someone with integrity. As they began to walk away, a man in a frantic, expensive suit came running down the concourse, followed by 2 lawyers. It was the station manager for Vista Airways. General, please, the manager panted. There must be a mistake. We can't have our flagship aircraft seized. We can't have our crew arrested. This is a PR nightmare. The general stopped. He turned slowly to the station manager. You should have thought about your PR before your crew decided that a sergeant major's dignity was less important than a brat's comfort. We can fix this, the manager pleaded. We'll give Mr. Booker lifetime first class. We'll issue a public apology. Elias looked at the manager. You can keep the first class, Elias said. I'd rather walk. Elias and the general turned and walked out through the security doors, leaving the station manager standing amidst the flashing lights and the ruins of his airline's reputation. But the story wasn't over. The arrest was just the beginning. The internet had seen the videos. The hashtag boycott Vista was trending #1 globally. And somewhere in a high-rise office in New York, Preston Walsh's father was watching the news And he wasn't calling his lawyers to save his son. He was calling his PR team to disown him. The hard karma was just winding up for the knockout punch. The holding cell at DFW Airport was cold, a stark contrast to the heated leather seats of first class. Preston Walsh sat on a metal bench, stripped of his tie, his belt and his shoelaces. He looked small. The arrogance that had filled the cabin of Flight 882 had evaporated, replaced by the shivering terror of a man who had never faced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. Across the city, the digital world was burning. The video recorded by the woman in seat 2B, whose name it turned out was Dr. Abigail Thorne, a prominent civil rights attorney, had hit Twitter, X, and TikTok simultaneously. It was titled simply, "Hero Ejected for Brat. Vista Airways Commits Suicide." Within 2 hours, the video had 40 million views. The footage was damning. It showed Elias's calm, dignified refusal. It showed Gavin's sneering condescension. It showed Preston's nasal, entitled demand to get him out of there. And most crucially, it showed the moment the police dragged Elias away, while he quietly warned them of the mistake they were making. In the boardroom of Vista Airways headquarters in Chicago, CEO Jonathan Crane was watching the stock ticker on the wall. It was a bloodbath. Vista VST was down 18% in pre-market trading. "Get the PR team in here now," Crane roared, throwing a glass paperweight against the wall. How did we let this happen? Who is this kid? Who is Preston Walsh? His secretary, pale and shaking, pressed a button on the remote. The news flickered onto the main screen. A reporter was standing outside the Pentagon. Sources confirm that the Department of Defense has officially suspended all travel contracts with Vista Airways pending a counterintelligence review, the reporter said. This is unprecedented. The Pentagon isn't just angry. They are treating the ejection of Sergeant Major Booker as a breach of national security protocols. We are hearing reports that the Air Force is reviewing Vista's maintenance certifications as well. Crane sank into his chair. The government contracts accounted for 30% of their annual revenue. "Get me Harrison Walsh on the phone," Crane whispered. "His son started this. He has to fix it." But Harrison Walsh, the billionaire oil tycoon and majority shareholder of the investment group backing Vista, was not in a fixing mood. In a penthouse overlooking Manhattan, Harrison Walsh sat in a leather armchair, a glass of scotch in his hand. He was watching the same video. He watched his son, his heir, act like a petulant child. He watched him destroy the family name in 3 minutes of 4K video. His personal lawyer, a shark named Sterling, stood by the window. "The board wants a statement, Harrison," Sterling said. "They want to know if you stand by Preston." Harrison took a sip of scotch. He didn't look at Sterling. "My son just cost me $600 million in stock value in an afternoon. He insulted a decorated veteran on camera, and he got arrested by Homeland Security." Harrison set the glass down. The sound was like a gavel. "Cut him loose." Sterling blinked. "Sir, he's in federal custody. He needs a legal team." "No," Harrison said, his voice ice cold. "Issue a statement. The Walsh family condemns the actions of Preston Walsh. We have zero tolerance for disrespect toward our armed forces. He is acting as an individual, not as a representative of Walsh Enterprises. We are severing his access to the family trust effective immediately." You're bankrupting him while he's in jail?" Sterling asked, stunned. "He wanted to be a big man," Harrison said, turning his chair to face the window. "Let's see how big he is without my checkbook. Let him rot." Back in the interrogation room at DFW, the door opened. Agent Miller, no relation to the captain, walked in. He tossed a file on the table in front of Preston. "Good news, Mr. Walsh," the agent said dryly. "Your father's lawyer just called." Preston's face lit up with hope. "Oh, thank God. Is he bailing me out? Is he suing the airline?" "Not exactly." The agent smiled a predator's smile. "He called to inform us that he is not representing you, and that your credit cards which you used to book that ticket have been cancelled by the primary account holder. You don't have a lawyer, Preston, and unless you have a public defender on speed dial, you're facing federal charges for interfering with a flight crew and obstructing a federal operation alone." Preston let out a sound that was half squeak, half sob. "But I'm rich." "Not anymore," the agent said. "Now let's talk about what you said to the flight attendant to convince him to kick off a sergeant major, because Gavin is in the next room and he is singing like a canary. He says you offered him a bribe." Preston's eyes went wide. The walls were closing in. The fallout wasn't just swift. It was biblical. 2 days after the incident, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, grounded Vista Airways' entire fleet of 737s for a compliance audit. It was a bureaucratic death sentence. With their planes on the ground, Vista was bleeding $10 million a day. But the real drama was happening in the courtroom. The United States versus Gavin Reynolds, Richard Miller, and Preston Walsh was fast-tracked. The government wanted to make an example. They wanted to show that the dignity of a veteran wasn't up for negotiation. The courtroom was packed. Sergeant Major Elias Booker sat in the front row, wearing his dress blues. His chest was heavy with medals, the Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars, and the Purple Heart. He sat with his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. He hadn't given a single interview. He let his service speak for itself. Captain Miller, the pilot who had ordered the arrest, looked aged by 10 years. He took a plea deal immediately. He surrendered his pilot's license permanently and agreed to testify against Vista Airways' corporate culture in exchange for probation. He would never fly again. He would spend the rest of his life working as a dispatch manager for a trucking company in Ohio. Gavin, the head purser, wasn't so lucky. The prosecution played the cockpit voice recorder. The jury heard Gavin lying to the captain. They heard him say he's just some old aggressive guy, probably senile. Let's just dump him. The jury looked at Elias, calm, composed, a pillar of strength. Then they looked at Gavin, weepy, disheveled, pathetic. The verdict for Gavin was guilty on 2 counts. Filing a false report and interference with transportation security. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. The judge, a woman named Justice Halloway, stared him down during sentencing. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, "you took a position of authority and used it to demean a man who has sacrificed more for this country than you will ever understand. You are a bully, and prison is the only place for bullies who break the law." Then came Preston. Preston Walsh stood alone. No high-priced dream team. Just a court-appointed lawyer who looked exhausted. Preston tried to cry, tried to play the victim, but the video evidence was insurmountable. He was found guilty of federal obstruction. But the real punishment wasn't the 6-month jail sentence. It was the civil suit. Elias hadn't sued for money, but the other passengers had. A class-action lawsuit was filed against Vista Airways and Preston Walsh for intentional infliction of emotional distress and unlawful delay. Preston, cut off from his fortune, was personally liable. His assets were seized. His penthouse was foreclosed. His sports car was auctioned. When he emerged from prison 6 months later, Preston Walsh, the man who wouldn't sit in row 4, was moving into a studio apartment in Queens, working as a telemarketer. The final blow landed on Vista Airways itself. 3 weeks after the trial, the Department of Defense announced they were awarding their logistics contract to Delta. The stock price of Vista hit $0.42. The board of directors voted to file for Chapter 11, bankruptcy. The airline was dissolved. Its routes were bought up by competitors. Its planes were repainted. The name Vista Airways became a cautionary tale in business schools across the country. 1 month later, Elias Booker finally made it to Washington, D.C. He wasn't there for a court date. He was there for the meeting he had missed. He walked into the Pentagon, his limp still present but manageable. He was escorted not by MPs but by the Chief of Staff of the Army. They walked down the long corridors until they reached a heavy oak door. The general opened it. Inside, the room was full. Generals, admirals, and civilians in high-ranking suits stood up. At the head of the table sat the Secretary of Defense. "Sergeant Major Booker," the secretary said, walking over and extending his hand. "I apologize for the delay in your arrival. I trust your return trip will be more comfortable." Elias shook the hand firmly. "The flight doesn't matter, Mr. Secretary. It's the landing that counts." The secretary smiled. "We have retrieved the encryption keys from your luggage, but we also have something else for you." He gestured to the table. There was a file. "The settlement from Vista Airways liquidation assets," the secretary said. "The court awarded punitive damages. Since the airline is gone, the insurance payout goes to the victim. It's $2 million, Elias." Elias looked at the file. He didn't touch it. "I don't need $2 million, sir," Elias said. "I have my pension. I have my porch. I have my fishing pole." "Then what do you want to do with it?" Elias thought for a moment. He thought about Sarah, the young flight attendant who had tried to help him, the one who had risked her job to tell the truth. "Find Sarah," Elias said. "The flight attendant. Give her half. She's going to need it to pay for pilot school. She told me once she wanted to fly the plane, not serve the drinks. And the other half. There's a veterans center in East Texas," Elias said. "They need a new roof, and maybe some better chairs, the kind that don't hurt your back." The secretary nodded slowly. "Consider it done." Elias turned to leave. He had completed his mission. He had delivered the keys. He had destroyed an airline. He had taught the world a lesson in respect. As he walked out of the Pentagon, the sun was shining. A black town car was waiting for him at the curb. The driver opened the door. "Where to Sergeant Major?" the driver asked. Elias smiled. "Reagan National, Terminal B." The driver hesitated. "You're flying commercial again, sir?" "After everything." "I am," Elias said, climbing in. "But this time, I think I'll take the train back to Texas. I prefer the legroom." 1 year had passed since the incident that the media now referred to simply as the Flight 882 affair. The world moves fast, usually forgetting scandals within a week, but this one had left a scar. It had changed the landscape of American aviation. In a small, sun-drenched airfield outside of Austin, Texas, a twin-engine trainer plane taxied to a stop. The propeller spun down to a halt, and the door opened. Stepping out onto the wing wearing a crisp white shirt with a single gold bar on the epaulette was Sarah. She wasn't serving drinks anymore. She wasn't apologizing for delayed flights or being yelled at by entitled passengers. Thanks to an anonymous grant for integrity in aviation that had mysteriously paid off her flight school tuition in full, she was logging her final hours for her commercial pilot's license. She walked into the small FBO fixed-base operator lounge to grab a water. The TV in the corner was playing a documentary on the Business Channel. The title on the screen read, "The Crash of Vista, How One Mistake Cost Billions." Sarah paused, watching the screen. They showed the footage of the empty Vista Airways terminals, now stripped of branding. They showed the auction blocks where the Vista fleet had been sold off for parts. And then they showed a brief clip of a man in a grey jacket walking out of a DFW, holding Cellhead held high. She smiled, touching the small silver wings pinned to her shirt. She hadn't seen Elias since that day, but she wrote him a letter every month. He never wrote back, but every time she passed a check ride, a bouquet of wildflowers. Blue bonnets from Texas would arrive at her flight school with a note that simply said, "Keep climbing." Across the country, in a cramped, humid apartment in Queens, New York, the same documentary was playing on a cracked smartphone screen. Preston Walsh sat on a futon that smelled of stale takeout. He was wearing a uniform, but it wasn't a designer suit. It was a green apron with a coffee chain logo on it. His shift started in an hour. He watched the screen with a hollow expression. The narrator was talking about the Walsh Doctrine, a new corporate governance rule adopted by major companies to automatically disown executives or their family members who damaged the company's reputation through public misconduct. It was named after his father, Harrison Walsh, who had ruthlessly cut Preston out to save the rest of his emperor. Preston swiped the video away. He couldn't bear to watch it. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his landlord. Rent is due. No excuses this time. Preston stood up, his knees cracking. He looked at his hands, dry-chapped from washing dishes and scrubbing counters. The soft manicured hands of the man who demanded seat 2A were gone. Hard karma hadn't just hit him. It had reconstructed his entire reality. He grabbed his apron and walked out the door. He had to take the subway to work. He stood for the whole ride. He never asked anyone for a seat. Back in East Texas, the sun was setting over the creek behind Elias Booker's house. The air was thick with the sound of crickets. Elias sat in his favorite rocking chair, the wood creaking rhythmically. His bad leg was propped up on the railing. A black government sedan crunched up the gravel driveway. Elias didn't get up. He knew who it was. General Arthur Caldwell stepped out of the car, holding 2 bottles of cold beer. He walked up the porch steps and handed one to Elias. "You're hard to find, Sergeant Major," Caldwell said, sitting on the railing. "I'm exactly where I've always been, General," Elias replied, cracking the bottle open. "I thought you'd like to know," Caldwell said, looking out at the water. "Congress passed the Booker Act today. Unanimous vote. It makes it a federal felony to remove a passenger to accommodate a non-essential airline employee or VIP preference. It also mandates increased compensation for bumped passengers." Elias took a sip of beer. "They named a law after me." "They did. I didn't ask for that." "That's exactly why they did it," Caldwell chuckled. "You know Vista's old CEO, Jonathan Crane? He's managing a golf course in Florida now. He told a reporter last week that the biggest regret of his life was not knowing who was in seat 2A. Elias watched a hawk circle in the sky above the tree line. He thought about the anger he had felt in that cabin, the humiliation, the way Gavin had looked at him. It felt distant now, like a bad dream. "It wasn't about who I was, General," Elias said softly. "That's what they never understood. If I had been a janitor or a teacher or a nobody, it still would have been wrong. You don't need a rank to deserve respect." Caldwell nodded, clinking his bottle against Elias's. "Amen to that." The two old soldiers sat in silence as the twilight deepened. The world had changed because one man refused to move. An airline had fallen. Laws had been rewritten. Lives had been destroyed and rebuilt. But here on this porch it was just quiet. Elias finished his beer and set the bottle down. He looked at his knee, then out at the horizon. He finally felt it, the one thing he had been looking for when he boarded that plane a year ago. He felt comfortable. "General," Elias said, standing up and stretching. "You hungry? I caught some catfish this morning." "I could eat." Caldwell smiled. "Good. Come on inside and wipe your feet. I just mopped the floor, and unlike Vista Airways, I run a tight ship." Elias opened the screen door, and for the first time in a long time, he laughed. A deep, rumbling laugh that echoed into the night, the final word in a battle he had won without firing a single shot. This story serves as a powerful reminder that influence and power are not always visible. In a world obsessed with status appearances and VIP treatment, we often forget that true strength is quiet, dignified, and unwavering. The downfall of Vista Airways wasn't just caused by a lawsuit. It was caused by the collective realization that human dignity is not for sale. Preston Walsh and the crew of Flight 882 made the fatal error of judging a man by his coat rather than his character. They assumed that because Elias Booker was quiet, he was weak. They learned at the cost of their careers and their freedom that the quietest people often have the loudest history. Whether you are a CEO or a server, a general or a janitor, respect is the universal currency. When you try to counterfeit it, you go bankrupt. Wow, talk about instant karma. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, make sure to hit that like button. Right now, it really helps us share these stories with more people. What would you have done if you were in Elias's shoes? Would you have moved, or would you have stood your ground? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more incredible stories of justice, revenge, and real-life drama, don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and remember, treat everyone with respect because you never know who you're talking to.